Recorded Books and RB Digital present Darkover Landfall by Marion Zimmer Bradley, narrated by Max Bellmore. Chapter 1. The landing gear was almost the least of their worries, but it made a serious problem in getting in and out. The great starship lay tilted at a 45-degree angle, with the exit ladders and chutes coming nowhere near the ground, and the doors going nowhere. All the damage hadn't been assessed yet, not nearly, but they estimated that roughly half the crew's quarters and 3/4 of the passenger sections were uninhabitable. Already half a dozen small, rough shelters, as well as the tent-like field hospital, had been hastily thrown up in the great clearing. They'd been made mostly out of plastic sheeting and logs from the resinous local trees, which had been cut with buzzsaws and timbering equipment from the supply materials for the colonists. All this had taken place over Captain Lester's serious protests. He had yielded only to a technicality. His orders were absolute when the ship was in space. On a planet, the colony expedition force was in charge. The fact that it wasn't the right planet was a technicality that no one had felt able to tackle. Yet it was, reflected Raphael McCarran, as he stood on the low peak above the crashed spaceship, a beautiful planet. That is, what they could see of it, which wasn't all that much. The gravity was a little less than Earth's, and the oxygen content a little higher, which itself meant a certain feeling of well-being and euphoria for anyone born and brought up on Earth. No one reared on Earth in the 21st century, like Raphael McCarran, had ever smelled such sweet and resinous air, or seen faraway hills through such a clean, bright morning. The hills and the distant mountains rose around them in an apparently endless panorama, fold beyond fold, gradually losing color with distance, turning first dim green, then dimmer blue, and finally to dimmest violet and purple. The great sun was deep red, the color of spilt blood, and that morning they had seen the 4 moons, like great multicolored jewels hanging off the horns of the distant mountains. McCarran set his pack down, pulled out the transit, and began to set up its tripod legs. He bent to adjust the instrument, wiping sweat from his forehead. God, how hot it seemed after the brutal ice cold of last night, and the sudden snow that had swept from the mountain range so swiftly they had barely had time to take shelter. And now the snow lay in melting runnels as he pulled off his nylon parka and mopped his brow. He straightened up, looking around for convenient horizons. He already knew, thanks to the new model altimeter which could compensate for different gravity strengths, that they were about 1,000 feet above sea level, or what would be sea level if there were any seas on this planet, which they couldn't yet be sure of. In the stress and dangers of the crash landing, no one except the third officer had gotten a clear look at the planet from space, and she had died 20 minutes after impact, while they were still digging bodies out of the wreckage of the bridge. They knew that there were 3 planets in this system. One an oversized, frozen methane giant, the other a small barren rock, more moon than planet except for its solitary orbit, and this one. They knew that this one was what Earth expeditionary forces called a Class M planet, roughly Earth-type and probably habitable. And now they knew they were on it. That was just about all they knew about it, except what they had discovered in the last 72 hours. The red sun, the 4 moons, the extremes of temperature, the mountains all had been discovered in the frantic intervals of digging out and identifying the dead, setting up a hasty field hospital and drafting every able-bodied person to care for the injured, bury the dead, and set up hasty shelters while the ship was still inhabitable. Raphael McCarran started pulling his surveying instruments from his pack, but he didn't attend to them. He had needed this brief interval alone more than he had realized. A little time to recover from the repeated and terrible shocks of the last few hours, the crash, and a concussion, which would have put him into a hospital on crowded, medically hypersensitive Earth. Here the medical officer, harried from worse injuries, tested his reflexes briefly, handed him some headache pills, and went on to the seriously hurt and the dying. His head still felt like an oversized toothache, although the visual blurring had cleared up after the first night's sleep. The next day he had been drafted, with all the other able-bodied men not on the medical staff or the engineering crews in the ship, to dig mass graves for the dead. And then there had been the mind-shaking shock of finding Jenny among them. Jenny. He had envisioned her safe and well, too busy
Sample complete. Ready to continue?